They're disappearing people. ICE is disappearing people. You know, like kidnapping? ICE is doing that. You can stop them. Hi, I'm Chris. I study and talk about how power works because institutions of power like governments and corporations play a major role in our lives. Sometimes they'll ruin your life for no apparent reason. You may or may not have broken a law, but you still might not understand why you need to be punished for your behavior. Did you really hurt anyone by stealing that gum, painting that graffiti, or crossing that invisible line? And yet there are some people who think ruining your life is an appropriate punishment for these crimes. You were uprooted from your family, community, and job, then put in a cage and transported to another part of the world? Shouldn't have broken the law. What is ICE doing and why? Why do people support it? And what can we do about it? Everyone should be asking these questions. Let's see if my answers contribute something to the conversation. To get a conversation going, we should agree on the basics. What's ICE doing? We'll get to that. What is ICE? That's easy. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, part of the Department of Homeland Security, started in 2003. No, more basic than those questions. What is a country? I tried to answer that question over a series of videos, so check it out if you haven't seen it. To keep it short, a country is a nation state. That is, it's a state which claims ownership of a given territory and the natural resources and labor of the people on that territory. It's a nation, which is an exclusive cultural group created by the state over time. Nationalism is the belief in nation states, that you and everyone else is a member of a nation state, that you owe some kind of loyalty to the nation state, that your nation state is at least a little bit better and more valuable than all the others. So what's a border? In a word, violence. Not that they're based on violence, but they are themselves a form of violence. They're not lines on the map. The power the state derives from the border is not confined to those lines. Borders are the criminalization of movement. They are the threat of force to remove someone because the state has not granted them permission to be in that place at that time. We accept the state's violence because it's normal to us, and we assume it's important for something, like stopping the drug trade, which it obviously does not do. If I want to cross into another country without the permission of the ruling state, what happens? I get stopped. Not just on the line, anywhere within it. By people with guns. Why the guns? Well, they'll arrest me if I don't stop and show them I have official approval from the state to be there, and shoot me if I run away. I'm not allowed to cross a national border without a permission slip. The effect is I'm not allowed out of this country without permission. I'm grounded until I ask nicely and pay money to be allowed out. It's always possible I cross a border undetected. Then I'm in the country, but I still don't have the papers and the stamps. Someone from the police or border guard can still stop me and ask for my national hall pass anywhere in that other country, which is to say anywhere in any other country. If the state hasn't authorized me to be where I am, the police will force me at gunpoint to leave that part of the world and return to the one part I'm allowed to be in. Borders have turned a world that used to be wild and free into a ruthlessly enforced system of cages. Along with being violence, borders are an ideology. After all, they aren't real. They aren't written into the earth. They're a belief. Not just that there's this line, but that billions of people we've never met should not be allowed inside that line. You have to be taught borders exist, that they matter, and billions of dollars should be spent enforcing them. To believe in border ideology, we need to assume there's something better about our nation state and the people from it, and that most people in the world aren't cool enough to hang out with us. They're a bad influence. To believe all this stuff, we have to remain ignorant about the people in question. To treat them like one big faceless mass with a few good ones our immigration bureau will pick out as worthy. Every school teaching the national curriculum reduces outsiders to stereotypes. They're all just unthinking members of an inferior culture. Only the ones we let in become individuals. Only individuals are worth caring about. This ideology involves a lot of forgetting. The memory of the nation state is extremely selective. It remembers those events that imply national glory or failure, depending what lesson it wants to impart. It creates narratives of unbroken chains of events that demonstrate consistent values like freedom and justice to tell people what their country stands for. It sweeps its crimes under the rug. How many Americans know about the dozens of wars and coups the US has conducted just since World War II? It's extremely relevant to understanding why there are so many migrants from Latin America in the US, because it has generally supported right-wing governments and guerrillas all over the continent that have committed all kinds of atrocities these people are trying to avoid. And that's why Americans don't know. How many Americans can explain why the US is the shape it is without resorting to manifest destiny and other non-answers? Like, how did the US get Texas? How did Texas become so white? But we're not supposed to ask those questions. The question the US has generally asked is how to get rid of as many brown people as possible. Patrolling borders, requiring visas, quotas, super complicated immigration procedures, and super strict enforcement are all part of this goal of racial purity. Now the racial purity party is in power, they're threatening to deport all 11 million undocumented people in the US without trials. Forgetting also looks like someone saying, it couldn't happen here. There couldn't be concentration camps violently disrupting millions of lives and everyone else just carries on. That couldn't happen. But it has happened before, and it's happening again. The enslavement of African people, the genocide of Native people, interning 120,000 Japanese Americans during World War II, rounding up 1 million Mexican Americans in 1954. These processes required huge amounts of violence that set the stage for the US of today. The violence we're seeing today is not a repudiation of American values. It's a return to them. That's the problem. But not all Americans agree, and they oppose this new old order the right wing is laying down. Unlike the liberal system that's on its way out, this more authoritarian one is unpopular. That's why they need to keep using so much violence. Installing a new order requires imprisonment, enslavement, and torture to terrorize people into accepting it. And that is what ICE is doing to thousands of people. I might use the word deportation for what's going on, but it's not deporting exactly. Deportation implies a legal process. This is rounding up and imprisoning people for political and racial reasons, then sending them around the world to be tortured and enslaved. The term for that is human trafficking. To help build support for the government among bigots and bootlickers, Fox News has come out in favor of human trafficking. As if to announce how much they love the traffic in human bodies and hate free speech, a former Ron DeSantis staffer called for Mehdi Hassan to be deported, and the host of CPAC wants to give Rashida Tlaib the boot. Because if you can't beat him, ask mommy and daddy government to beat him for ya. The government is going all in on dehumanizing everyone they want to traffic. The White House has designated foreign gangs as terrorist organizations, so law enforcement can call everyone whose life they want to destroy a gang member. Trump and his people say everyone arrested and black-bagged and disappeared is a threat to national security and public safety. That's because in 2017, Trump wrote an executive order stating that everyone who enters the US illegally presents a significant threat to national security and public safety. Policy turns prejudice into fact.
These are heinous monsters, rapists, murderers, kidnappers, sexual assaulters, predators who have no right to be in this country, and they must be held accountable.
It's true, but they won the election, so they'll be harder to stop now. ICE claims total jurisdiction to capture anyone on their lists. They're getting in their tanks and going door to door, grabbing people out of their homes. They've also been snatching people up from schools, hospitals, churches, and even kidnapped a guy from a courtroom so he couldn't stand trial. They're detaining whole families now. ICE kidnapped a mother and her 3 children from a town in New York. Headlines abound of unsuspecting travelers to the US placed in chains, deprived of food and sleep, and stuck in solitary confinement for a week. People are getting locked up for nothing and sent to places they barely remember or have never been. But hey, maybe they were accused of something. Under the Lake and Riley Act, that's all you need. The Lake and Riley Act empowers anyone to get an undocumented person in the US trafficked by merely accusing them of a crime. You wonder if that's what happened to everyone ICE is disappearing, but there's no way to know. We do know something about where they're sending people. They're sending people to a vastly expanded Guantanamo Bay center for brown men with beards. We know they're planning to detain immigrants on military bases. We know they sent about 100 people to a concentration camp in Panama. The White House made propaganda videos you might have seen of hundreds of Venezuelan immigrants being transported to and then landing in El Salvador. Kilmar Obrego Garcia's wife only found out where he was when she saw him in that video. So at least some of the people ICE has abducted are accounted for. Are they gang members? Well, who knows? They haven't had trials. The government hasn't even really attempted to produce evidence, either because there isn't any, or because it doesn't care about evidence. All we know is a non-zero number of them aren't gang members. But even if it were, why does their association mean this bigger gang gets to imprison and enslave them for the rest of their lives? Because their violence is committed out of uniform? Being in a state-controlled space does not mean you're safe. It means you're trapped. This is the kind of environment where SA becomes likely. This headline is from 2018. How often does it occur now? So far this year, we know of 3 who've died in ICE custody. Or to put it another way, 3 people were killed by ICE custody. Police, border patrol, and prison guards are authorized by the state to take full control of people's bodies. So, presumably, people who like putting their hands on and using violence against others with impunity are going to gravitate towards these professions. What kind of person do you think would want to work at Secot Mega Prison in El Salvador? Prisoners have faced all kinds of abuses, and 261 of them have died there. Or, to phrase it differently, 261 people who never faced trial have been killed by Secot Prison. Or at facilities in Louisiana where people are malnourished, denied care, and sometimes disappeared. Who would sign up to preside over a prison that removed women's uteruses without their consent? What kind of nurse denied Rumeysa Öztürk medical care and ripped off her hijab? Is it considered a perk if the facilities are crawling with bugs? Hey, is this the Beast Games behind-the-scenes special? No, it's Chrome Detention Center in Florida. The White House isn't just using ICE, though. They're using the Department of Justice, U.S. Marshals, the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, and the Federal Bureau of Prisons for ethnic cleansing, too. They're asking local police to help out, which Florida signed up for straight away. They're getting civilians to help them, too. ICE is already training and deputizing civilians to carry out their Home Alone fantasies against real people. But there already were border vigilantes playing cowboys and Indians, and of course, they're getting the green light now. You can be sure some of them will attempt to abduct and traffic people crossing the border if they don't just shoot them. What's more, according to Politico, a group of prominent military contractors, including former Blackwater CEO Eric Prince, has pitched the Trump White House on a proposal to carry out mass deportations through a network of processing camps on military bases, a private fleet of 100 planes, and a small army of private citizens empowered to make arrests. It's like the FEMA camp conspiracy theory, except a million times more likely to happen. The White House has put in some effort to justify all this legally, for example, by invoking the 1798 Alien Enemies Act to transport the so-called gang members to El Salvador. But it's also lukewarm on the idea of the rule of law, so it's also been ignoring court orders. It's planning to grant itself the power to remove immigration judges if they don't fall in line. It's threatening lawyers for students targeted by ICE. The US is rejecting and sending back asylum seekers and refugees, which is a huge breach of international law, and they're trying to make it harder to apply for asylum anywhere. I can't think of anything more likely to lead to these people being abused and trafficked. The State Department has been canceling people's visas, suddenly putting them in the country illegally. They did it to Mahmoud Khalil, then they did it 300 more times. In maybe all cases, certainly in these ones, they did it to silence and punish people for speaking out against Israel. That's because the right wing in power demands total ideological conformity by law. I hope there are no more illusions about what the right wing is. It's obvious that everything they say about freedom, especially freedom of speech, has always been just a way to get into power where they can destroy freedom. As some of the people who speak out most against injustice, students are frequently the first target of authoritarian states. A White House official told the Free Press that the basis for targeting Khalil is being used as a blueprint for investigations against other students. Khalil is a threat to the foreign policy and national security interests of the United States, said the official, noting that this calculation was the driving force behind the arrest. The allegation here is not that he was breaking the law. He was mobilizing support for Hamas and spreading anti-Semitism in a way that's contrary to the foreign policy of the US. But as we know, as per Project 2025 and Project Esther, the government automatically labels everyone who speaks out against Israel as anti-Semitic and a supporter of Hamas. Let's also remember the language of the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act empowers the state to do anything it wants to anyone it calls a terrorist, including indefinite detention without trial. So they're canceling visas and they're snaking passports too. Anything to make you so vulnerable you have to do whatever they want. In that vein, ICE has targeted an immigrants' rights activist, a labor organizer, a critic of Trump's BFF, and just any kind of activist, really. The White House also accidentally on purpose sent a text to Ukrainians telling them to leave the country in 7 days or else the federal government will find you. This is not going to stop at people who were born somewhere else. Trump is publicly mulling deporting citizens. Border agents arrested a U.S. citizen and created warrants after the arrest, lawyers say in court, and then did it again 21 more times. Don't be too shocked. Deporting citizens on trumped-up charges is only a small step from what they're doing now. On NPR in March, an interviewer asks 3 times if any criticism of the Israeli or U.S. government is a deportable offense, then if protesting is a deportable offense, and the White House official she's interviewing wriggles and squirms his way out of saying yes. If they can cancel visas and treat legal residents as if they were terrorists, they can do it to citizens too. If the president has his own personal Gestapo, he's going to use it on dissenters of all kinds. Unidentified state agents in the US have been known to grab protesters off the street, throw them in unmarked vans, and take off with them. Now it's happening every day. People in the US might have to brace themselves if Trump invokes the Insurrection Act, which would let him use the military domestically in addition to all these other agencies. He's already claiming to be at war, that everyone coming in illegally is invading. He didn't even need a 9/11. He just claims it's all necessary. The FBI recently disappeared a cybersecurity expert and professor at Indiana University and his wife. Was it border violence? Or is disappearing people just the new normal? It's important to point out all this is only the ramping up of existing policy. And deportation and the cruelty inherent to the process did not start with Trump. He didn't design the border. He's using the border for white supremacist purposes, just like his predecessors. Remember, the Alien and Sedition Acts are from 1798. Hucksters were trying to whip people into a frenzy about foreigners with their dangerous ideas back then, too, and haven't really stopped at any time in US history. More recently, forces and budgets and technology have made it possible to deport millions of people. Reagan, Clinton, Bush, and Obama all deported millions of people each. Deportation wasn't any more warranted or fair back then. Prison conditions under those guys weren't much better. Prison guards weren't much less sadistic. Trump is just using the forces other presidents created. An evergreen method of getting elected is to pick a power the state has and promise to use that power to hurt people in an out-group. While I would say the main goal behind all this is power, feeding the prison industry and all the corporations that make money off prison slavery isn't far behind. Obviously, Najib Bukele has his hand out. More facilities are being built to house more people. Remember, prison is an industry, which means its revenue has to grow continuously forever. They're not going to stop building prisons even if all the undocumented people go. You can't really expect it won't happen to you just because you're a citizen, because citizens get swept up in ICE raids too. More people will get arrested on fewer charges. They'll get sent to prisons of all kinds, including psychiatric asylums. Some of them will disappear. Should we have open borders? No. We should have no borders. Should we abolish ICE? Yes, it is integral to the goal of abolishing borders. But no borders doesn't just mean getting rid of the border guard. It would include decriminalizing drugs and sex work, destigmatizing the behaviors that push people to the margins and make them most vulnerable to trafficking, It requires dealing with the racism and fascism that have festered in North America and Europe for centuries. It would also mean letting go of this fantasy that the state exists to keep you safe, and that restricting people's movement is integral to your security. Once we're free of the propaganda, we can begin to dismantle the border. At present, what's needed is to protect migrants and all the other targets of a white supremacist state. I don't think we should spend a lot of time trying to persuade people who are committed to border ideology that they're wrong. In my experience, we too often accept their arguments on face value. They have concerns about the economy and how well those people integrate, because they'll never say they want fewer brown people. I think if you're actually concerned about human trafficking and people's safety and just freedom in general, you'll oppose borders. But for Trump voters, the violence, the cruelty, the ethnic cleansing is the whole point. They'll just go to the fewer brown people rallies and vote for the fewer brown people party and then say they were duped. No, what's happening now requires action. Action requires people, planning, coordinating, but it can also be spontaneous. You probably don't know who ICE's next targets are, but you might be able to intervene to stop them from being taken. Many thousands, and according to the organizers, millions of people are protesting around the US and worldwide, and that's great. This is a rally in Missoula, Montana, population 78,000. This is in St. Paul, Minnesota, population 300,000. We need this now. It's a show of anger and solidarity. But the point of these protests must not be to petition the authorities. Donald Trump is not a well-meaning public servant looking to represent his constituents. He's a power-hungry sadist who benefits from our displays of grief and impotent rage. Politics in the United States today is a question of relations of raw force. When we take the streets, we're not addressing Trump or his ghoulish underlings, we're addressing each other. We're setting out to demonstrate that resistance is possible, that there are tactics that can exert concrete leverage against our oppressors, that there are enough people invested in solidarity that it can become a social force capable of compelling Trump and his lackeys to stand down. If we really want to stop them, we'll need to physically block the way of ICE agents and vehicles and grasping hands. You've got the people. There's millions of them. They can do more than just block traffic. They can block people. They can literally stand in the way of the state. They can literally open the doors to holding cells. They can literally remove people from office. They don't need to ask the Democratic Party or the courts or the Constitution. They can just do what's right. They can leave offices in ruins and vehicles unusable. In Egypt, they burned down the headquarters of the ruling party. Something similar happened after ICE disappeared 48 people from New Mexico, because there's always a softer target, like the corporations aiding and supplying the state. Did you hear how protesters took over Trump Tower last month? Remember I said ICE kidnapped a mother and 3 kids from a town in New York? Well, the town got together, marched not just through the town, but to the home of Tom Homan, Trump's border czar, who lives around there. By marching to his home, they were saying, "We know where you live." The family is now free. I've been writing this poem in my head. First they came for the migrants, then they came for the students, then we came for them. Along with direct action, you can provide mutual aid for migrants. What does it look like? The question with mutual aid is always, what do people need? You can ask them, but we know migrants need shelter, employment, legal counsel, translators. They'll need things like food, clothing, and hygiene products, which you can probably get donated. They need protection from the state and vigilantes. They might need the ICE emergency hotline. They can benefit from spaces to talk to each other, maybe to organize and educate, or maybe just to chill, to breathe, to laugh and feel safe. You can provide these things. You can join the people already doing it. And in the same day, you can melt some ice together. Either way, get involved. See you out there.